Captain Michael Harrison's life was about to change in a way he couldn't have predicted. Just moments ago, he'd dismissed the young man sitting in seat 1A, telling him to move to the back of the plane where he belonged. What he didn't know was that this young passenger wasn't just a random traveler. He was Elias Carter, a 19-year-old billionaire and the new majority owner of Global Airways. And as the plane soared over the dark expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, with nothing but the endless sky beneath them, Eli was preparing to press a button that would change everything. Eli Carter sat in the plush first-class cabin of Global Airways Flight 110, staring out the window. His mind wasn't on the view or the luxury around him. It was focused on the daunting, life-altering decisions he had to make once the plane landed. His father, Marcus Carter, had built this airline from the ground up, and now, 3 weeks after his sudden death, Eli was expected to run it. In those 3 weeks, he had navigated a whirlwind of grief, responsibility, and the sharp sting of betrayal from investors and creditors who smelled weakness. Eli had always been the quiet, studious type. At Stanford, he had shied away from the limelight, more comfortable in lecture halls than boardrooms. But now, at 19, he had inherited a multi-billion-dollar empire. The magnitude of it all had hit him hard. Yet, even now, on the plane, he felt a disconnect between who he was, a kid trying to find his footing, and the corporate titan he had to become. His fingers flew over the keys of his laptop as he skimmed through another email from Sarah Jenkins, the sharp-minded COO of Moore Enterprises. The email, though full of legal jargon and financial terms, still conveyed a singular truth. The airline was on the verge of collapse. Eli, "We're running out of time," Sarah had written in her last message. "Ares Capital has filed a motion to ground the entire fleet. If they succeed, we lose everything. The airline, our assets, and the future your father worked for." The weight of it all was suffocating. Sarah's words hung in his mind as the plane cruised above the Atlantic. His father had always been prepared for everything. But this situation was unlike anything Marcus had planned for. The breach of covenant was based on technicalities, stemming from his father's untimely death. Ares Capital, the vulture hedge fund, had long been circling the airline, and now they were preparing to pounce, using Marcus's death as the trigger to seize control of Global Airways' fleet. Eli closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to remember his father. A towering figure in the business world, Marcus had built his empire through grit and foresight. But it was never just about the money. Marcus loved aviation in a way that few could understand. The airline wasn't just a business to him, it was a legacy. And now, it was Eli's responsibility to protect it. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. It was another message from Sarah. "Flight 110 is departing for London. I'll be waiting for you in the boardroom when you land. The hearing is in 24 hours. If you're not there, we lose everything. I'm counting on you," Eli inhaled sharply. This was it. This was the moment that would define not just the airline's future, but his own. If he failed, everything would crumble. The weight of his father's empire was on his shoulders, and he had no choice but to carry it. He glanced at the boarding pass in his hand. Seat 1A, the flagship seat. It was meant for the most prestigious passengers, the VIPs, the people who owned the company, the people who ran the world. But Eli felt out of place here, as if his clothes, a simple black hoodie and sneakers, didn't belong in this world of polished suits and extravagant luxury. His feet rested on his carry-on, and though it felt wrong, the image of him, disheveled, young, and tired, seemed fitting. He wasn't the polished billionaire the world expected. He wasn't even sure if he was the right person to lead the company. His father had raised him to be humble, to be driven by purpose, not by wealth. But now he had no choice but to step up. The world would have to accept him as he was. He wasn't going to change for anyone. The flight attendants glided down the aisle offering pre-departure drinks. Eli declined, instead burying himself in the stack of legal papers that had consumed his thoughts for the past few days. As he scrolled through the documents, the voice of the senior flight attendant, Karen Foster, sliced through the air. She was a striking woman, her blonde hair immaculately styled. "Sir, I believe you're in the wrong seat," she said, her voice flat with professional disdain. Eli glanced up from his screen. "I'm in seat 1A. Her gaze lingered on him with a momentary flicker of confusion before her expression tightened. "This is the first-class section, sir. You might want to head back to your assigned seat in coach." Eli didn't respond at first, thinking this was just another misunderstanding. But Karen's eyes were cold now. There was a subtle arrogance in the way she addressed him, as if she believed he didn't belong in this space. He wasn't some wealthy businessman in a suit. He was just a kid, a teenager with a hoodie, and that's all she saw. She was about to learn that looks could be deceiving. He held up his boarding pass again, his finger pointing to the seat number. 1A, he repeated, this time with more conviction. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line as she scanned the ticket, her eyes flickering over the name. For a brief moment, confusion clouded her expression. The name meant nothing to her. The seat, however, meant everything. She looked up from the boarding pass, the skepticism in her eyes barely masked by her thin smile. "I suppose even students win raffles sometimes," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Please, hurry along." Eli didn't argue. He didn't have the energy to fight. He nodded, tired and frustrated, and walked past her down the narrow jet bridge to the waiting aircraft. He needed to save the airline. He couldn't waste time dealing with petty insults. As Eli entered the first-class cabin, he could sense the difference between him and the passengers around him. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the world around him was filled with expectations. The elite had always been in charge, but now the rules were changing. Eli found his seat, 1A, a spacious suite with a retractable door for privacy. It was everything a first-class passenger could want: luxury, comfort, and isolation. But just as he began to settle in, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. He glanced up to see Karen, the senior flight attendant, accompanied by none other than Captain Michael Harrison. Harrison was a tall man, probably in his late 50s, with a strong presence and a head of silver hair. He exuded authority. He also looked like he had just stepped out of a recruitment ad for pilots. He held his coffee like it was a weapon, and his eyes fixed on Eli with a stare of unadulterated disdain. "This is the one I was talking about," Karen said in a stage whisper, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. She glanced at Eli with a smirk, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Captain Harrison looked down at Eli with that same air of superiority. "Son, there must be some mistake," he said, his voice deep and resonating with power. "This cabin is reserved for premium guests. You're clearly in the wrong seat." Eli's gaze remained steady. He was done with the games. "I'm in seat 1A. This is my seat," he said flatly, his voice losing any trace of uncertainty. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "I know what your ticket says," he began, stepping closer to Eli's seat. "But I've been flying this route for 25 years and I know my passengers. You don't belong here." Eli stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. His eyes never left the captain's. He wasn't going to cower. "I'm not going anywhere," Eli said, his voice steady but firm. "I just want to sit down." Harrison's jaw tightened, but he wasn't done. "Maybe you didn't hear me," he said, lowering his voice just enough to make it sound more menacing. "I'm not asking, I'm telling you. Go back to coach." Eli stood there for a long moment, the weight of Harrison's words hanging in the air. But Eli was no longer the scared, grieving teenager that had boarded the flight moments ago. The grief over losing his father had hardened into something else: determination. He had been underestimated his entire life. Now, the whole world was about to learn just who he was. The silence between them stretched, as Captain Harrison, still towering over Eli, seemed to be waiting for some sign of submission. But Eli didn't flinch. His eyes, steely and resolute, locked with Harrison's. He wasn't backing down. Not this time. "Captain, you can stand there all day, but I'm not moving," Eli said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to echo through the cabin. "I'm in my seat, and you're going to have to deal with it." Harrison's face twisted with incredulity. He looked from Eli to Karen as if expecting support. Instead, Karen's face had shifted from smug superiority to something far more uncomfortable. She was still standing there, her arms crossed, but there was a faint flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Sir," Karen said slowly, stepping forward. "This is not how we do things here. You can't just waltz into first class without the proper credentials." Eli's patience was wearing thin. "I'm not here to explain myself to you," he snapped, his voice firm now. "I don't have to justify who I am or why I'm in this seat. My ticket says 1A, and that's where I'll stay." A low rumble of murmurs began to spread throughout the first-class cabin as passengers became aware of the escalating tension. Some leaned forward, eager to see what would unfold, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Eli didn't care. He had a mission to accomplish. Captain Harrison's eyes flared with anger, his professional veneer cracking. He stepped closer, towering over Eli. His fingers twitched as if itching to grab Eli by the arm and force him out of his seat. But Eli didn't flinch. He didn't even budge. "Look, kid," Harrison said, lowering his voice in an attempt to sound more authoritative. "This is a place for important people, not people like you. Now, I'm asking you nicely to move." Eli looked up at him, his jaw setting in quiet defiance. "It's not a request," he replied, his voice cutting through the tension. "You're the one who's out of line here, Captain. I'm the one with the authority on this plane now." Harrison's face darkened. His grip on his coffee tightened, the cup shaking slightly in his hand. He leaned in closer, his words low and threatening. "I don't care who you think you are, or what kind of game you're playing. This is my plane, and I'm telling you to go back to coach," he spat, his breath hot with disdain. Eli didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. Instead, he pulled his phone from his pocket and began typing. The small but powerful gesture caught Harrison off guard, and for a split second, the captain hesitated, unsure of what Eli was doing. He watched as Eli's fingers flew over the screen, the glow of the phone casting a faint light across Eli's face. Eli hit send. The phone buzzed almost immediately. He held it up for Harrison to see. On the screen was a message from Sarah Jenkins, the COO of Moore Enterprises, and a name that would rock Harrison's world. The message read, "Emergency protocol engaged." Confirmed Elias Carter, chairman of Moore Enterprises. "Captain Harrison, you are advised to comply with instructions from the chairman immediately." Eli lowered the phone slowly, letting the message sink in. Harrison's face turned pale as the words processed in his mind. You're the chairman?" Harrison stammered, his voice faltering as the realization hit him. He took a step back, blinking in disbelief, as though the notion of a 19-year-old being the chairman of the airline was simply too absurd to comprehend. "That's right," Eli said, his voice calm but heavy with authority. "And as of 48 hours ago, I own this airline. I own everything you've worked for, Captain. And now you're going to do exactly what I say." Harrison opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in his career, he was at a loss. He had spent decades in the skies, commanding respect from everyone beneath him. But now, this young kid, a kid he had just attempted to humiliate, had turned the tables on him in the most humiliating way possible. Eli's phone buzzed again, and he looked at the screen. It was another message from Sarah Jenkins. He didn't need to read it aloud, but he did anyway, his voice clear and deliberate. "Captain Harrison, you are hereby relieved of command, effective immediately. Flight 110 is under the command of Chairman Eli Carter. Please return to your seat and remain calm until further notice." The silence in the cabin was deafening. Harrison's face drained of color as his own words from earlier echoed back to him, now twisted in a cruel karmic loop. He had told Eli to move to the back of the plane. Now it was he who would be demoted, not just in rank, but in dignity. Eli leaned back in his seat, his expression calm and almost detached, as if this was all a matter of routine. He closed the pod door behind him, his fingers never straying far from his laptop. "I'll be in my seat now, Captain," Eli said, his tone almost bored. "You should probably check your emails. You're about to have a very bad flight." In the cockpit, Captain Harrison was fuming. He stormed toward the flight deck, his mind racing. He had just been completely outmaneuvered, and the young man in seat 1A, the one he had so carelessly dismissed, had just taken the reins of the entire airline. Harrison's knuckles were white as he gripped the door to the cockpit, his breath coming in sharp, angry bursts. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath, trying to regain his composure. "There's no way this is real." He stepped into the cockpit and slammed the door behind him, startling First Officer David Chen, who was seated at the controls. "What's going on, Captain?" Chen asked, looking up from his instruments. His face was flushed with confusion. Harrison stood there for a moment, still processing the absurdity of what had just transpired. He tried to steady himself, but the knot in his stomach grew tighter by the second. "The kid in 1A, he's the chairman. Elias Carter, the owner of the damn airline." Chen blinked, incredulous. "What? That's impossible." "It's true," Harrison growled. "I've been a pilot for 30 years. I've seen everything, but this is something else. I need to get control of the situation." Meanwhile, in first class, Eli wasn't watching the drama unfold in the cockpit. He was focused on the bigger picture. He had already started drafting the paperwork needed to save the airline. His father's legacy was slipping through his fingers, and if he didn't act now, there would be nothing left to save. The entire flight was just a blip on the radar of what he was facing. His father's company was about to collapse unless he could pull off a miracle. And right now, with the entire financial system teetering on the edge, the plane was just another chessboard. As the minutes ticked by, Eli's mind raced through scenarios, possibilities, and the cold, hard facts of business. He was already in too deep. There was no turning back now, but as the plane cruised smoothly through the skies, Eli's focus remained razor-sharp. He wasn't just going to save the company. He was going to turn it into something greater, something his father would have been proud of. The hum of the plane's engines provided a steady backdrop to the tension building in the first-class cabin. Captain Harrison was no longer in control. The moment he'd confronted Eli, his authority had begun to slip away, but what had just happened was still sinking in. He couldn't believe it. This 19-year-old kid, wearing a hoodie and sneakers, had just flipped the script on him and, in the blink of an eye, had taken over everything Harrison had spent years building. Harrison paced in the cockpit, his mind reeling with disbelief. "I've been flying this route for over 25 years, he muttered, running his hands through his graying hair. "I know what I'm doing. I'm the captain. I don't take orders from some kid." First Officer Chen was silent for a moment, his brow furrowing as he absorbed the gravity of the situation. "So, the kid is really the new chairman?" Harrison, his hands shaking slightly, nodded. "He's the one who owns the airline now. Everything. The fleet, the operations, the company. It's his. We're just passengers on this flight, Chen." The first officer's mind was racing. He'd never imagined something like this happening. Harrison had always been the one who commanded respect. And now, the young man in seat 1A was the one who had everyone's fate in his hands. "Captain," Chen said hesitantly, "maybe we should just let it go. We don't want to make things worse." Harrison scowled at him. "Let it go? You don't get it, do you? We just had our careers stripped away in front of everyone. I'm not just going to sit here and take it." But as Harrison's frustration mounted, a message blinked across the cockpit's primary screen. A direct communication from the aircraft's internal systems. The message wasn't from the usual control stations, nor did it come from the company's usual operational channels. It read, "Attention, flight crew. Effective immediately, all airline assets, including this aircraft, have been transferred to Phoenix Aviation Holdings. The change of control is now in effect. You will receive new operating instructions shortly. Stand by for further updates." Chen stared at the screen in disbelief. What does this mean?" Before Harrison could answer, the lights in the cockpit flickered. The familiar Global Airways branding on their system's navigation screens abruptly disappeared. It was replaced with something new. A bright, fiery phoenix, wings outstretched, engulfing the screen. Beneath the image was the new name, Phoenix Aviation. Harrison's face drained of color as he stared at the Phoenix logo, and it hit him. Eli wasn't bluffing. This wasn't some petty corporate maneuver. This was real. The airline was gone, and Phoenix Aviation had just taken over. Back in the first-class cabin, Eli remained seated, his laptop open in front of him. He could feel the tension escalating, not just between him and the flight crew, but throughout the entire aircraft. He knew it was only a matter of time before someone, either a member of the crew or a passenger, would challenge him directly. And he needed to be ready. Eli wasn't some pampered, inexperienced billionaire. He had inherited a legacy, yes, but also a set of responsibilities that weighed heavily on him. His father, Marcus, had built Moore Enterprises into a global powerhouse, and Eli wasn't about to let anyone tear it down because they didn't respect him. The noise in the cabin began to rise as passengers became aware of the change. The once muted chatter was now laced with whispers and hushed tones, as if the entire plane had collectively realized that this wasn't just a flight to London. This was a battle for control, one that would affect everyone on board. Eli didn't react to the murmurs around him. He continued to type away, his fingers dancing over the keys as he worked on the legal strategy to save his father's empire. His goal was simple: preserve the airline's assets long enough to gain a financial foothold. Once that was secured, he could plan his next move. But before he could dive deeper into the legal work, his laptop buzzed. A message from Sarah Jenkins popped up on the screen. "The creditors are circling. You're going to have to pull the trigger on the Phoenix Protocol sooner than expected. Ares Capital has dispatched agents to seize assets when you land. If you don't act now, we lose everything." Eli's stomach twisted into a knot. He had been prepared for a fight, but not one this immediate. He'd known things were going downhill, but to have everything come to a head mid-flight, with creditors on the brink of seizing control, was something even his father hadn't anticipated. The weight of the responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just about the airline anymore. It was about the future of thousands of employees, families who depended on this airline to make a living. As the plane leveled off and began to cruise through the sky, Captain Harrison emerged from the cockpit. His face was red, his expression tight with frustration. He took a deep breath before addressing the cabin through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison's voice crackled over the speakers, "we've just reached our cruising altitude. The weather ahead is smooth, and we're projected for an on-time arrival in London. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." He clicked off the mic, his eyes scanning the cabin. He bypassed the other first-class passengers who were engrossed in their movies or enjoying their champagne, and walked straight to Eli's seat. Eli didn't look up. He was lost in his work, typing furiously as his mind processed legal documents, corporate strategies, and restructuring plans. He knew what was coming, but he wasn't going to give Harrison the satisfaction of seeing him panic. "Mr. Carter," Harrison's voice was low, cold. "I need to speak with you." Eli paused for a moment, finally looking up from his screen. "What is it, Captain?" His voice was calm but firm. "You're a fraud," Harrison snapped, his voice filled with disdain. "I've checked the company directory. Your father was the chairman. You might share his name, but you're not him. You don't belong here." Eli stood, the chair scraping back with an audible noise. He was tired of being belittled, tired of being told he wasn't enough. His eyes narrowed, his jaw set. "I'm here because I am the chairman," Eli said, his voice low but filled with quiet authority. "I'm here because I own this plane and I own your career. If you've got a problem with that, we can resolve it. But I'm not moving. You'll have to deal with it." Harrison's face flushed with anger. His hands balled into fists. "You're nothing but a kid playing dress-up. You're not qualified to run this airline. You don't know the first thing about what it takes to keep this operation in the air." Eli took a step closer to Harrison, his eyes unwavering. "You want to test me, Captain? I'm the new boss now, and if you think I'm going to back down, you're sorely mistaken." Without another word, Eli pulled out his phone, typing one final text. "I'm Elias Carter. I'm the new chairman of Moore Enterprises, the parent company of this airline. Your job is to fly this plane, Captain. My job is to ensure you still have a plane to fly when we land." He hit send. Harrison's phone buzzed in his pocket. His face turned ghostly white as he checked the message. Eli's voice was ice-cold now. "You've been warned, Captain. Take your seat and do your job." The tension in the cabin was thick, almost suffocating. For the past several minutes, Passengers had been subtly observing the unfolding conflict between Captain Harrison and the young man in seat 1A. What had started as a simple confrontation was now something far more significant. The passengers were no longer just travelers on an airplane. They were witnesses to a drama playing out in the air, a battle for authority that had the potential to shape the very future of global airways, or rather, Phoenix aviation. Some of the passengers, usually too engrossed in their own lives to care about the inner workings of the airline, were now leaning in, eyes darting between Eli and the disgruntled Captain Harrison. The whispers were soft, but they were there, like the undercurrent of a river that only those paying close attention could hear. "Did you hear? That kid is the new owner of the airline," one passenger whispered to another. "Unbelievable." "I thought it was just a publicity stunt," came the response. "The captain doesn't know who he's dealing with, does he?" Eli felt the eyes on him. He wasn't bothered by the attention, not anymore. He was used to being underestimated. It had been that way his entire life. Even when his father had been alive, Marcus Carter had fought tooth and nail to prove that he belonged, to build an empire from the ground up. And now, Eli was doing the same thing, but from a much higher starting point. His father's empire had handed him the tools. It was his job to wield them. But it wasn't just the passengers' whispers that bothered him. It was the sudden isolation he felt, the weight of all those expectations settling onto his shoulders. He wasn't just representing his family anymore. He was representing every single person who relied on the airline. The pilots, the cabin crew, the ground staff, the passengers. If he failed, they would all pay the price. He glanced up and saw that Karen Foster, the senior flight attendant who had earlier dismissed him, was watching him closely. She stood in the galley, her hands tightly gripping the counter as if she was bracing for something she couldn't control. It was clear she didn't know what to make of Eli. Was he a child who had stumbled into a position of power, or was he something more? Eli caught her gaze and held it for a brief moment. She didn't look away, but there was something different in her eyes now. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of recognition. The flight attendants who had once scorned him were now caught between their duty to the airline and their growing awareness of who Eli really was. Even Chloe Davis, the youngest member of the crew, who had been quietly observing the entire interaction, seemed unsure of what to do. She had stayed out of the confrontation so far, but Eli could tell she was watching him closely, trying to figure out where her loyalty should lie. "Mr. Carter," Chloe's voice came softly from the galley. She stepped forward, a bottle of water in her hand, her expression a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. Is there anything I can do for you?" Eli looked at her, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. It wasn't often that people showed kindness without an agenda. "Thank you, Chloe," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm fine, just trying to save the airline." She hesitated before offering a small, encouraging smile. "I've been here a while and I've seen a lot of things, but this is something else." Eli's lips quirked slightly. "Yeah, it's a bit much for me, too. But this is my fight now, and I won't let anyone tear down what my father built. Not without a fight." The brief exchange was enough to give him a momentary sense of clarity. He wasn't alone on this flight. There were people here, some of them even willing to help, even if they didn't fully understand the stakes. He could count on the crew that mattered. The rest, the ones who had already judged him based on his age or appearance, were irrelevant. Just as Eli was about to turn back to his work, the cabin door to the cockpit swung open again. Harrison stepped out, his face flushed with anger. His eyes locked with Eli's, a mixture of frustration and humiliation washing over him. "This isn't over," Harrison snarled, his voice low but threatening. "I'm the captain of this plane, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let some kid steal everything I've worked for." Eli remained seated, his posture relaxed despite the captain's aggression. "Captain, you can keep pretending that you're still in charge, but the truth is, you're not. The protocol has already been activated. You've been relieved of your command. I suggest you return to your seat and let me handle the rest." Harrison seethed but didn't respond. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He seemed to be weighing his options, whether to challenge Eli further or to retreat to the cockpit in defeat. After a long, tense pause, Harrison spun on his heel, storming back toward the flight deck. The door slammed shut behind him with a force that rattled the bulkhead. Eli didn't feel any triumph, no sense of victory. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about taking control of something that had been torn away from him and doing it in a way that would honor his father's legacy. The real battle would begin when they landed. The tension in the cabin was thick, almost suffocating. For the past several minutes, passengers had been subtly observing the unfolding conflict between Captain Harrison and the young man in seat 1A. What had started as a simple confrontation was now something far more significant. The passengers were no longer just travelers on an airplane. They were witnesses to a drama playing out in the air, a battle for authority that had the potential to shape the very future of global airways, or rather, Phoenix aviation. Some of the passengers, usually too engrossed in their own lives to care about the inner workings of the airline, were now leaning in, eyes darting between Eli and the disgruntled Captain Harrison. The whispers were soft, but they were there, like the undercurrent of a river that only those paying close attention could hear. "Did you hear? That kid is the new owner of the airline," one passenger whispered to another. "Unbelievable." "I thought it was just a publicity stunt," came the response. "The captain doesn't know who he's dealing with, does he?" Eli felt the eyes on him. He wasn't bothered by the attention, not anymore. He was used to being underestimated. It had been that way his entire life. Even when his father had been alive, Marcus Carter had fought tooth and nail to prove that he belonged, to build an empire from the ground up. And now, Eli was doing the same thing, but from a much higher starting point. His father's empire had handed him the tools. It was his job to wield them. But it wasn't just the passengers' whispers that bothered him. It was the sudden isolation he felt, the weight of all those expectations settling onto his shoulders. He wasn't just representing his family anymore. He was representing every single person who relied on the airline. The pilots, the cabin crew, the ground staff, the passengers. If he failed, they would all pay the price. He glanced up and saw that Karen Foster, the senior flight attendant who had earlier dismissed him, was watching him closely. She stood in the galley, her hands tightly gripping the counter as if she was bracing for something she couldn't control. It was clear she didn't know what to make of Eli. Was he a child who had stumbled into a position of power, or was he something more? Eli caught her gaze and held it for a brief moment. She didn't look away, but there was something different in her eyes now. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of recognition. The flight attendants who had once scorned him were now caught between their duty to the airline and their growing awareness of who Eli really was. Even Chloe Davis, the youngest member of the crew, who had been quietly observing the entire interaction, seemed unsure of what to do. She had stayed out of the confrontation so far, but Eli could tell she was watching him closely, trying to figure out where her loyalty should lie. "Mr. Carter," Chloe's voice came softly from the galley. She stepped forward, a bottle of water in her hand, her expression a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. Is there anything I can do for you?" Eli looked at her, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. It wasn't often that people showed kindness without an agenda. "Thank you, Chloe," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm fine, just trying to save the airline." She hesitated before offering a small, encouraging smile. "I've been here a while and I've seen a lot of things, but this is something else." Eli's lips quirked slightly. "Yeah, it's a bit much for me, too. But this is my fight now, and I won't let anyone tear down what my father built. Not without a fight." The brief exchange was enough to give him a momentary sense of clarity. He wasn't alone on this flight. There were people here, some of them even willing to help, even if they didn't fully understand the stakes. He could count on the crew that mattered. The rest, the ones who had already judged him based on his age or appearance, were irrelevant. Just as Eli was about to turn back to his work, the cabin door to the cockpit swung open again. Harrison stepped out, his face flushed with anger. His eyes locked with Eli's, a mixture of frustration and humiliation washing over him. "This isn't over," Harrison snarled, his voice low but threatening. "I'm the captain of this plane, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let some kid steal everything I've worked for." Eli remained seated, his posture relaxed despite the captain's aggression. "Captain, you can keep pretending that you're still in charge, but the truth is, you're not. The protocol has already been activated. You've been relieved of your command. I suggest you return to your seat and let me handle the rest." Harrison seethed but didn't respond. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He seemed to be weighing his options, whether to challenge Eli further or to retreat to the cockpit in defeat. After a long, tense pause, Harrison spun on his heel, storming back toward the flight deck. The door slammed shut behind him with a force that rattled the bulkhead. Eli didn't feel any triumph, no sense of victory. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about taking control of something that had been torn away from him and doing it in a way that would honor his father's legacy. The real battle would begin when they landed. The next few hours passed in tense silence. The cabin remained unusually quiet, the usual sounds of clinking glassware and friendly chatter replaced with the hum of the engines and the occasional soft shuffle of feet as the crew moved about. The passengers had mostly settled in, but the unease in the air was palpable. The moment Harrison had left the cockpit, the mood had shifted. No one seemed quite sure what to do next. Chloe returned to Eli's seat once more, this time with a small tray of snacks. She placed it on the fold-out table in front of him. "Would you like anything else, Mr. Carter?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. Eli looked up from his laptop, surprised by her gesture. "Just call me Eli," he said, offering her a tired smile. "And I think I'm good for now." "Thanks." Chloe nodded, and after a brief pause added, "I just wanted to say, whatever happens, I respect what you're doing. It's not easy, but you're handling it." Eli felt a twinge of gratitude. In all the chaos, it was hard to remember there were still people who cared, people who didn't see him as just a kid or a target. He looked at her for a moment, his eyes softening. "Thank you, Chloe. It means more than you know." Before Chloe could respond, the intercom crackled to life, and the voice of Captain Harrison cut through the stillness of the cabin. "Folks, this is your captain speaking. We're currently at cruising altitude and on course for London. We expect smooth skies for the rest of the flight and we'll begin our descent in about 3 hours. Please make yourselves comfortable, and we'll update you closer to landing." There was a slight quiver in Harrison's voice, a telltale sign of his frustration, but Eli barely registered it. His mind was elsewhere, already calculating the next steps. This wasn't just about keeping control of the plane. This was about ensuring that the new era of Phoenix aviation would begin on his terms, with respect, integrity, and a relentless drive to make the company stronger than it had ever been. And he knew that, despite everything, the hardest part was yet to come. As the plane descended toward Heathrow, the tension that had simmered throughout the flight finally erupted. The crew was on edge. Harrison, who had remained largely quiet since his confrontation with Eli, seemed to be seething with anger. His earlier arrogance had given way to frustration, and now he was desperate to regain control of something. Anything. But his actions, driven by his ego, were about to spiral out of control. The PA system crackled again, this time with an ominous message. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison's voice sounded strained, "we are approaching our descent into London Heathrow. We'll be landing shortly. I just wanted to make sure you all know that this flight is not going according to plan. There have been some unforeseen technical issues." Eli's heart sank as he listened. He knew Harrison's pride had pushed him to the edge, and now the captain was attempting to sabotage the flight's landing to regain control. But Eli was ready for it. He had prepared for every eventuality. With a calmness that belied his age, Eli opened his laptop and typed a single line of text to Sarah Jenkins. "We've been sabotaged. I need full control. Activate the final protocol." The final descent was drawing closer, but inside the aircraft it felt like the calm before the storm. Eli had every expectation that this flight would be remembered not for its destination, but for the battles that had unfolded at 35,000 feet. As the plane began its gradual descent toward London Heathrow, Eli felt the pressure mounting, not from the physical descent but from the weight of everything hanging in the balance. He glanced up from his laptop for a moment, taking in the quiet tension that had overtaken the cabin. The passengers, once relaxed and enjoying the flight, now sat stiffly, clearly aware that something was off. The atmosphere was thick with unease. Harrison had made a public declaration over the PA system, hinting at unforeseen technical issues. But Eli wasn't buying it. He knew Harrison was angry, furious even. But more importantly, he knew Harrison was desperate. Desperate to reclaim control in a situation where he had already lost it. Eli wasn't about to let it escalate any further. He turned his attention back to his laptop, continuing his work on the restructuring plans. The room around him, the whispering passengers, the quiet murmurs of the crew, all seemed to fade into the background as he focused. He was playing the long game, and this was just one battle in a much larger war. Then, without warning, the aircraft's internal systems flickered. It wasn't a major malfunction, but it was enough to be noticed. The screens in the cabin flickered and then switched from the usual Global Airways logo to something new. A phoenix, wings spread wide in fiery glory. A simple image, but one that held deep significance. It was the emblem of his father's legacy, reborn under a new name, a new banner. The change wasn't just cosmetic, it was strategic. The passengers looked up, some startled, others intrigued. Whispers spread quickly throughout the cabin. What's going on? Why is the logo changing? I thought this was Global Airways. What's Phoenix Aviation? Eli kept his focus, typing a final line of text to Sarah Jenkins. Activate the final protocol. Secure the systems. We're going full speed ahead with the Phoenix restructuring. No more delays. He hit send, closing his laptop with deliberate care. As he leaned back in his seat, a quiet sense of finality washed over him. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. He was about to take full control, not just of the airline, but of his own future. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Harrison was losing control in more ways than one. The flickering screens, the sudden appearance of the Phoenix logo, and the message that had come through about the change in ownership were all contributing to his growing frustration. He had known deep down that this wasn't just a simple corporate shakeup. It wasn't just some kid who had inherited wealth and power. This was a battle of wills, a fight for survival in the high skies. Harrison stood over the control panel, his hands gripping the edge of his seat. First Officer Chen watched him closely, the tension between them almost palpable. "Captain," Chen began, his voice barely a whisper, "maybe we should just follow the protocol." "The kid, don't," Harrison snapped, cutting him off. "Don't you dare call him that again. He's a child, Chen. A rich little punk who doesn't know anything about the work we've put into this company." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I'm not just going to sit here and let him steal everything I've worked for." Chen's gaze dropped to the floor, unsure of how to proceed. He had always respected Harrison, but this was different. This wasn't about flying a plane anymore. This was about egos, power, and the fragile balance of authority. Harrison's words weren't just about the plane. They were about his pride, his years of experience, and the career he had built. "I don't know what else to say, Captain," Chen said quietly. "We've been locked out of the systems. It's his show now. The protocol's been activated." "No," Harrison grumbled. "I'll handle it. I'm not going down without a fight." Before Chen could respond, Harrison stormed out of the cockpit, determined to regain control of the situation. His thoughts were consumed with one goal: confronting Eli and putting an end to this power grab once and for all. The arrogance that had once fueled him now had nowhere to go, and it was rapidly turning into something more dangerous: desperation. As Harrison made his way back to the first-class cabin, Eli could sense the storm approaching. He could feel it in the air. Harrison was coming, and he was coming with a sense of entitlement, determined to reclaim his authority. But Eli was ready. He'd been prepared for this moment the moment he boarded the plane. It wasn't just about power. It was about respect. It was about proving to everyone, especially the crew who had underestimated him, that he wasn't just a kid playing at being a leader. He was the one in charge, and they had to accept it. Harrison reached the front of the cabin, his stride heavy with anger. He looked at Eli with a mixture of disdain and disbelief. "You think you can just waltz in here and take over, don't you?" Harrison's voice was laced with venom. "You've done nothing to earn this. You're just some kid who inherited everything. You don't have a clue what it means to keep this airline afloat." Eli stood slowly, his posture calm, collected, and confident. "I don't need to earn anything from you, Captain. I don't need to prove myself to you. What I do need is for you to do your job, fly this plane, and stop making a fool of yourself." Harrison's face twisted with fury. He stepped closer to Eli as if he could intimidate him into submission. "You're nothing but a spoiled brat. And when this flight lands, you'll see that I'm not going down without a fight. The airline, the crew, everything. It's all mine, not yours." Eli didn't flinch. He didn't need to say anything more. His phone buzzed, a single notification from Sarah Jenkins. "Protocol is complete. The transfer is locked in. The assets are secured." He raised the phone slowly, holding it up for Harrison to see. The look on Harrison's face shifted. His defiance faltered. The realization of what had just happened sinking in. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. This was a shift in power, one that would change everything. Eli's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of finality. "I own this airline now, Harrison, and you're just a passenger, like the rest of them." For a moment, Harrison's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. There was no way to win now. The battle had already been lost. As the plane descended into Heathrow, Eli remained calm, his mind still processing the seismic shift that had just occurred. The flight, which had started with uncertainty and tension, was now winding down to its final moments. But for Eli, the true test was just beginning. The aircraft touched down smoothly on the runway, the wheels hitting the tarmac with a gentle thud. As the plane slowed and the engines roared their final commands, the entire cabin seemed to exhale collectively. The passengers, who had been witnesses to the drama unfolding in the skies, now sat in stunned silence. But Eli wasn't interested in the passengers' reactions. He stood up, his heart still racing with adrenaline, but his mind focused. He had just saved his father's legacy, but that was only the beginning. What came next would determine whether Phoenix Aviation would rise from the ashes, or whether it would fall into the same patterns of corruption and complacency that had brought it to this point. The crew, still unsure of how to react, watched as Eli walked toward the front of the plane. They had seen the change in the systems, the logo, the emails confirming his power, and they had witnessed the fall of Harrison, a man who had once stood as the face of authority in the skies. As Eli exited the plane, he was met by a small but important group of figures. Sarah Jenkins, a team of legal experts, and 2 officers from London's Metropolitan Police. The moment Harrison and the disgraced crew members stepped off the plane, they would face consequences for their actions. Their careers, once built on arrogance and privilege, had been reduced to dust. Eli looked back at the plane, his gaze lingering on the fiery Phoenix logo. "This is just the beginning," he said quietly. "We're not just rebuilding an airline. We're rebuilding a legacy." And as he stepped away from the jet bridge and into the bright lights of Heathrow, Eli knew that his father's empire was not just saved, it had been transformed, but there was more to do. The true challenge lay ahead. What do you think? Was Eli's decision the right one? Do you believe that karma truly played its part in the downfall of Harrison and the rise of a new leader in the skies? How would you have reacted if you were in Eli's shoes, trying to reclaim a legacy that seemed beyond your control? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you've been inspired by Eli's journey, the underdog who turned the tables and proved that true authority isn't about titles or wealth, but about character and determination, then don't forget to like this story and share it with your friends. And if you want more gripping stories of unexpected power shifts, inspiring leaders, and epic twists of fate, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what comes next.